The Russians are lying. That is the response from the White House as the Kremlin is now trying to blame the United States for the drone strike in Moscow on Wednesday. A spokesperson for the Kremlin claims that without evidence, this alleged attack was carried out by the Ukrainians at the order of the United States. And at the time of this attack, the U.S. said that they had no knowledge of anything planned, and Ukraine has repeatedly denied any involvement. Meanwhile, this is some of the aftermath in the town of Kherson, where Russian airstrikes killed 23 people. This was the latest attack, happened on Wednesday at a rail station and some residential buildings. Early this morning, Russia fired 24 more combat drones at Ukraine, including several at the capital city of Kyiv. All were destroyed, but it is the third attack we've seen on the capital city in the last 4 days. Here to talk more about it, Paul Rieckhoff, a national security and political analyst. He's also the president of Righteous Media and the host of the Independent Americans podcast. Good to see you as always. So Russia says the U.S. is behind this drone strike. The U.S. says no. Ukraine says we had no involvement. Is this a desperate move from Russia? How do you read this?
I think so, Marnie. I think it's preparation. All of this is preparation for what is likely to be the most massive military engagement we've seen since World War II. This spring offensive that you and I have been talking about for weeks seems to be unfolding. And these are some of the provocations that I think are going to lead us up to that moment. You can't trust the Russians. They've been lying throughout this. They've been lying during it. And I don't think anyone can believe anything coming out of Putin or the Kremlin. And I think, frankly, if the Americans were going to hit the Kremlin and Putin, they wouldn't do it with too little drones. I mean, they'd make it count. This looks like a ruse by the Russians to try to justify increased brutality and a new wave of missile strikes, more civilian casualties, as we continue to see the combat not only unfold, but intensify here in the last couple of hours and days.
The risk of escalation here is great, right? That's the concern. So we have to be wondering what Russia might try to do next. What's next in their deck of cards?
Yeah, I mean, escalation's always been a concern for over a year now, and we should always be concerned about what Russia can do in the most dangerous course of action. And nukes is always, the biggest element in that calculation. But at the same time, we can't paralyze ourselves. We can't just sit back and watch civilians get killed, watch children be slaughtered because we're afraid of what they might do. We've got to deal with the reality of what they are doing. And I think that's why you've seen, I think, the 37th installment of American weapons that are now on the way to Ukraine. It's been tens of billions of dollars. And now Patriot missile batteries are there. German Patriot missile batteries that are made in America are now in Ukraine. The American Patriot missile batteries, the American Abrams tanks will be behind that. And I think that's going to lead to an escalation beyond what we've seen before. But what that looks like, we really don't know.
And escalation, likely miscalculation, is what we don't want. We're looking at some images of the Patriots. Talk about those capabilities.
Well, they're going to help Ukraine secure the skies. They're going to shoot down missiles. They're going to provide anti-aircraft support, and they're going to help the forces on the ground move. Like, first of all, they're going to help protect civilians, which I think is key, which is why you saw Patriot missiles in the Gulf, in the first Gulf War. It's why you see them in places like Israel, because you want to stop missiles from killing civilians. I think that's the primary concern here. But they're also going to provide overhead support for the ground operations that seem to be culminating in and around Bakhmut and could happen all across the country. I spoke on my show last week to an American Army Ranger veteran who is right now training the Ukrainian military forces for that effort. There are American veterans who have joined the fight. There are Western fighters who have joined the fight. I think that's an untold part of this story, but I think they're also going to provide unique insight for the American public on what's actually happening on the ground in that fight and the American weapon systems that I think are going to prove pivotal.
Yep, and some of those weapon systems include high-mobility artillery rocket systems, howitzers, artillery and tank ammunition, tank weapons, small arms, trucks, and even trailers to transport all of this. This is all part of the latest installment from the U.S. to Ukraine. What of any of this do you think will help to change the game for Ukraine?
Well, it's firepower. I mean, it's literally ammunition. This has been such an exhaustive fight with artillery shells, with small arms ammunition. I mean, they need to support the close fighting that's happening on the ground, the likes of which we haven't seen since Stalingrad in World War II. So this is a very brutal, very conventional fight that's unfolding. And the American military-industrial complex is being put to a test. I think we've seen that. But also, almost every weapon system in the military in the United States arsenal is being tested. So there's an advantage to our military. necessary in that. We're learning what our military weapons can do, what they can't do, where the weaknesses are, and we're doing it without shedding military blood. So I think that's important. We're only delegating about 5% of the overall American defense budget, but we're seeing huge gains for the Ukrainians. We're seeing massive damage against the Russians, and we're getting to test our gear in a way we only could in a way like this.
Yeah, America continuing to supply weaponry, and Americans are on the ground in Ukraine. Another American, sadly, Paul, has recently been killed helping in the fight there. He's a former Marine, 26-year-old Cooper Harris Andrews. He is from Cleveland. Brave to go into a war zone no matter where it is. Americans on the ground. What concerns you about former service members who are there now assisting Ukraine, and just your thoughts on his death?
Well, Marnie, I think I'm concerned they'll be forgotten. I mean, this guy is a Marine. He was an Eagle Scout. He spent his whole life serving his country and serving his community. He went to Ukraine because he wanted to help civilians. I think he's a hero. I think we all can recognize that he did heroic things throughout his life, and I think he should be celebrated, and his story needs to be told. This is a time of adversity and controversy, and I think we've got to look for the helpers, the people who are running in when so many others are running out. And American veterans have been doing that, not just in Iraq and Afghanistan, but all around the world, in humanitarian conflicts, in war zones, after natural disasters. I think that American military veterans continue to inspire our country and will inspire the world.
Our thoughts with his family. Are you concerned, Paul, though, that Americans will be targeted there, used as pawns, as negotiating chips once they're found?
Sure, I think that's always a risk, but it's one that they understand. I mean, we're not sending active duty military troops. So I've got friends who are there right now. I've got friends who've gone, and they consider this a noble fight. They consider it a fight of our time, and they want to help. They want to help preserve freedom. They want to help protect kids and civilians, and that's really the core reason why so many of us signed up. And I think they're down for the fight, and they're going to be ready for whatever comes in the years ahead.
We've got a little bit of breaking news, and I want to get your response to this, Paul. 5 members of the Proud Boys have now been convicted of charges just moments ago following the attack at the Capitol on January 6th. 4 of them convicted of seditious conspiracy, including their former leader, Enrique Tarrio. This is an extremist group convicted of a plot to attack the Capitol in an attempt to overturn the election and Joe Biden then becoming president. What's your reaction to this? What larger message does it send?
I think they need to be locked up for a long time. I think they're enemies of America, and they should be treated as such. They tried to violently overthrow our government. I think they're a disgrace as American citizens. Some of them are military veterans, which I think is an incredible disgrace. And I think that the Justice Department and our legal system has to throw the book at them, not just to hold them accountable, but also send a message to anyone else who thinks they're going to take up violent means to try to overthrow our government. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of frustration in this country, but violence is not the answer. And someone who crosses this line, like the Proud Boys have in an extremist way, need to be locked up. They need to be locked up in defense of our national security. People need to remember this is a national security imperative, and the threat at home is even greater at sometimes. An example is January 6th than it is in Ukraine or anywhere else.
A lot happening this morning. We're also learning, Paul, the identities of soldiers killed in that latest helicopter training exercise in Alaska. What more are you hearing about what happened in that situation on the heels of several other deadly training crashes?
Yeah, I think we've lost 12 American military folks in the last few months. There was a training accident in Kentucky and now in Alaska. I think the important thing to remember, Marnie, is that being in the American military is dangerous. It's an incredibly hard job, whether you're serving overseas or you're in a training operation. And I think we need to remember that these men and women are putting their lives on the line every single day. We need to support their families. There are good charities out there like TAPS, the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, that support survivors' families. And I'd encourage people to remember them. Remember that our men and women are still in uniform, they're still defending our freedom, and they're still, unfortunately, losing their lives, and we've got to be there for them like they've been there for us.
Yeah, no, it's a dangerous job, and thank you, Paul, for your service. Before I let you go, we are waiting for the suspect in this latest shooting in Atlanta to appear in court. He is accused of carrying out a deadly attack inside a medical facility, killing 1 woman, shooting and injuring 4 others. We know he is a veteran. He was dealing with some mental health issues, according to his family. You and I have talked a number of times about vets waiting to see doctors about things that they're going through. I know that there are a lot of details we don't know about this situation, but how does this latest incident land with you, a veteran involved?
I think it's a terrible tragedy. I think there are a lot of incidents involving frustrated veterans, but often they hurt themselves. There are a lot of suicides that we see. There's huge mental health stress. This is absolutely a tragedy for the entire community. I think it's important to remember that most veterans are doing the right thing, or trying to help their communities. And when a situation like this happens, I always remind people that the EMTs, the cops, the nurses that are running in to help those survivors are probably also veterans, many more veterans than just this shooter. But we do need to focus on reforming the VA. We need to break down the bureaucracy, and we need to provide urgent mental health care, not just to veterans, but to all Americans.
We expect that suspect in court at any moment. Paul Rieckhoff, as always, it is a pleasure to talk to you. Unfortunately, the news of the day is not good, but we appreciate your perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Marnie, for covering it.